December 28, 1944, was a day that would linger in the memory of Allied command not for victories, but for tension so thick it could have been carved into the walls of Eisenhower's office. The Battle of the Bulge was raging, 12 days deep, and the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes had become a tomb for soldiers frozen in foxholes or trapped in mud, their cries muffled by wind and gunfire. At Bastogne, the American units were battered beyond recognition. Exhaustion etched deep lines on every young face, and the bitter cold had become a merciless enemy alongside the German panzer divisions. As the temperature plummeted, men who had survived bullets and shrapnel now found themselves threatened by frostbite, the silent killer that crept into toes and heels, consuming flesh, threatening entire limbs, and leaving permanent scars on the bodies and minds of even the strongest soldiers. It was amid this dire situation that General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, opened a memo that made his usually steady hands shake. Though not from fear, it was a precise, controlled anger, the kind born from a mixture of disbelief and professional outrage. The memo was not from the enemy. It was from a trusted ally, a fellow commander, a man whose reputation as a brilliant tactician was known across Europe, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. Montgomery's words were clinical, icy, and precise. He demanded the immediate relief of the American commanders of the 1st and 9th Armies. The reasoning was not strategic failure. It was not a failure to hold territory. It was something far more trivial to some, yet presented as damning to Montgomery: the inability to prevent trench foot among the troops. Eisenhower read the sentences again, disbelief tightening his chest. The young soldiers at Bastogne were starving, cold, and under relentless assault, yet Montgomery chose to indict their leaders for failing to maintain dry socks. To any rational mind, the absurdity should have been laughable. To Eisenhower, it was a dagger wrapped in silk, a betrayal at a moment when unity was life itself. Montgomery's memo was not just a critique. It was an attempt to undermine American command authority at the most critical junction of the war. It was a subtle coup disguised as concern. Montgomery's arguments were structured and precise, like a lawyer building a case. He cited statistics, calculated to terrify: more than 45,000 cases of trench foot, 3 times higher than British units operating in identical conditions. To Montgomery, this was irrefutable evidence of American incompetence. Yet the numbers alone did not capture the horror behind the statistics. Trench foot was no mere inconvenience. It was a crippling injury caused by weeks of exposure to water, mud, and cold. Soldiers lost toes, suffered tissue damage, and in extreme cases lost entire feet. 19-year-old boys who had never touched a battlefield now faced lives confined by frost-bitten limbs. Montgomery painted a picture in black and white. The Americans were amateurs in uniform, businessmen masquerading as generals, prioritizing industrial logistics over the welfare of the men who bled and froze under their command. Eisenhower understood the stakes immediately. This was not a complaint about hygiene. This was a direct challenge to the authority of American commanders, a political gambit designed to restructure command along British lines. Montgomery's private memos to Winston Churchill were even more damning. He argued that American generals, by failing to properly care for their men, were unfit for strategic command. Montgomery sought not just to critique, but to assume control of American armies, to centralize supply and fuel under British command, and to claim credit for victories he had not fought for. The memo was an assault disguised as professional concern, and it arrived at a moment when every minute mattered. The human cost Montgomery cited was real, and it was grim. American soldiers had been forced to survive for 30 days on K rations designed for 3. They slept in frozen foxholes, wet socks clinging to their feet, bodies stiff with cold, while the Germans tested every weak point in their defenses. But the numbers Montgomery wielded as evidence ignored context. American units were advancing at a pace that even the fastest British divisions could not match. Patton's Third Army had been moving with relentless aggression, covering ground in weeks that Montgomery's forces would have spent months securing. Every foot of terrain captured meant shortening the war, reducing the time Germans had to reorganize, and potentially saving tens of thousands of lives that would otherwise have been spent attacking prepared positions. To Eisenhower, the choice was clear. Short-term suffering, yes, but long-term victory, absolutely. Montgomery's memo framed the situation as if soldier welfare were a moral imperative, overriding all else. He pointed to British doctrine, strict rotations, mandated inspections of feet, enforced hygiene routines. For the British, every casualty was critical. Men were irreplaceable. By 1944, Britain had been fighting a total war for 5 years, with dwindling manpower and limited reserves. Discipline and preventive care were necessities of survival. Montgomery's logic followed. If American armies could not meet these exacting standards, they were unfit to command. The implication was audacious. The Americans needed British guidance to remain effective in combat. To Eisenhower, this was not just hubris. It was a direct threat to the sovereignty of his command and the morale of the troops who were enduring far more than Montgomery could comprehend from his comfortable headquarters. When Montgomery's memo reached Churchill, it carried both subtle flattery and hidden menace. He praised the Allied effort, but insinuated that American operational decisions were reckless. He framed himself as the protector of discipline, offering his leadership as the solution to what he painted as systemic American ineptitude. Churchill, reading between the lines, understood the implications. Montgomery was not merely concerned with frozen feet, he was angling for command authority over American armies. The memo was a chess move, and the pieces were thousands of soldiers caught in snow and mud. But Churchill also knew the danger of endorsing this request. To remove American commanders mid-battle would be political suicide and could fracture the fragile alliance. Back at headquarters, the American response was immediate. General Omar Bradley, upon hearing of the memo, was incensed. Known as the soldier's general, Bradley bore the emotional weight of every casualty notification that reached his desk. For him, Montgomery's critique was not only professionally insulting, it was morally offensive. The suggestion that he had neglected the welfare of his men struck at the very essence of his leadership. Bradley's fury was not aimed at the facts of Trench Foot, but at the hypocrisy. He was well aware of Montgomery's own record, particularly the catastrophic results of Operation Market Garden. There, British paratroopers had been dropped into Arnhem, facing almost certain annihilation. 17,000 casualties were sustained in just 9 days. Fewer than 2,000 escaped. Montgomery's professional planning had led men into a meat grinder, and now he was lecturing Americans on proper soldier care. Bradley's response was decisive. If Eisenhower allowed Montgomery to take command of American units, he would resign and make the reasons public, risking a diplomatic scandal that could shake the war effort itself. George Patton's reaction was different, but no less intense. He did not question the numbers, but he questioned Montgomery's entire philosophy. To Patton, the ultimate act of care was not dry socks or rotations, but victory achieved as swiftly as possible. Every day the army lingered in place was another day the Germans could reinforce, reorganize, and strike. He believed in speed, aggression, and relentless pressure. Trench foot was unfortunate, yes, but temporary. the risk of leaving soldiers idle in freezing conditions, waiting for supplies, was far worse. Patton's strategy was simple: press forward, maintain momentum, and shorten the war. By doing so, thousands of lives that would otherwise be lost in drawn-out battles could be spared. The cold, the mud, the hunger, these were immediate hardships, but they were outweighed by the long-term benefits of rapid victory. The contrast between British and American doctrine could not have been starker. Montgomery preached discipline and welfare, the science of soldier survival, with an almost clinical obsession. Patton and Bradley accepted suffering as a calculated risk, trading short-term misery for strategic advantage. American intelligence calculations had shown that Patton's August 1944 advance alone had shortened the war by 3 to 6 months. Had Montgomery's methodical approach been applied, the war could have dragged into 1945 or even 1946 with far greater casualties. Every day the Germans held their lines meant more dead, more destruction, more liberated cities delayed. The math was brutal but undeniable. 45,000 cases of trench foot versus potentially hundreds of thousands of combat deaths had the war been slowed to British specifications. Montgomery's calculations ignored the human context of his own operations. Market Garden had cost British paratroopers dearly. The airborne divisions had held bridges under impossible conditions, many killed or captured in days, all meticulously documented. Yet Montgomery lectured Americans for failing to maintain dry socks. The irony was chilling. He had presided over the deaths of men under his command in a flawed operation, and now demanded moral superiority over those who endured temporary suffering while achieving strategic breakthroughs. His logic was airtight on paper, but hollow in practice, revealing a mind more concerned with prestige than the human cost of his own decisions. In the days following the memo, Montgomery's rhetoric escalated. On January 7, 1945, he addressed a press conference with calm authority, claiming he had rescued American forces at the Bulge. He described battles as if they were his own, crediting himself for the survival and effectiveness of units that had been relentlessly fighting under American command. The audacity was breathtaking. Soldiers who had endured freezing nights, hunger, and relentless German fire were now part of a narrative shaped to glorify Montgomery, while undermining the achievements of the Americans. Bradley's reaction was immediate and furious. This was no longer a dispute over doctrine, it was a political threat. The alliance itself teetered on the edge of fracture. Churchill intervened swiftly, understanding the stakes. On January 18th, he delivered a speech in Parliament that praised American sacrifice and clarified the overwhelming American role in the Battle of the Bulge. He knew Montgomery's brilliance in tactics was real, but equally real was his danger in diplomacy. By lauding American efforts, Churchill preserved the fragile trust between the United States and Britain, ensuring that personal ambition would not undermine the strategic alliance. Even Montgomery's own staff confronted him. Major General Francis Dinning, his chief of staff, delivered an ultimatum: apologize to Eisenhower or lose command. Montgomery, stunned, had genuinely believed he was giving proper credit and offering professional guidance, but the damage was irreparable. The stakes of this conflict extended far beyond personality. The American philosophy of speed over welfare had tangible effects on the outcome of the war. Rapid advances by Patton and Bradley shortened the war and directly influenced the liberation of concentration camps in 1945. Every week shaved from the war meant fewer deaths in the camps at Buchenwald, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen. Extending the war for methodical supply management, as Montgomery advocated, would have allowed the Germans to continue atrocities for months longer. The cost in human lives, both military and civilian, was incalculable. In the Ardennes, the debate over socks, rotations, and dry feet was not abstract. It was life and death. German commanders interviewed after the war confirmed the importance of American operational tempo. Every time German forces tried to fortify positions, American units were already on the move, breaking through before defenses could be completed. Modal and von Rundstedt both admitted that the rapid advances of Patton's forces were a constant shock, preventing the Wehrmacht from stabilizing lines that would have caused massive Allied casualties later. The numbers spoke for themselves. Montgomery's methodical approach would have slowed the Allies, given Germans more time, and inevitably increased loss of life. Yet history rarely remembers these calculations. It remembers victories and the generals who secured them. Montgomery remembered dry socks and proper rotations. The Americans remembered ending the nightmare. By the end of December 1944, the stakes were set. Trench foot, cold, hunger, all real and terrible, were the price of speed. Montgomery's critique, though delivered with impeccable formality, was irrelevant to the lives ultimately saved by American operational doctrine. Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton understood it. For them, the war was not won in comfort, but in action. Every day that soldiers endured hardship was a day they pressed toward the end, toward liberation, toward survival. Montgomery prioritized methodical safety. The Americans prioritized strategic speed. And in the snow-choked forests of the Ardennes, where every man's breath steamed in the freezing air, the difference between those philosophies was measured in lives saved, cities liberated, and a world spared months of additional suffering. By the time January arrived, the war was still raging, but the principles were clear. American forces would continue to move with aggressive speed, accepting temporary suffering in exchange for rapid victory. British doctrine, while sound in its logic, could not account for the strategic imperative of ending the war quickly. The winter snows of 1944 would not see the Americans slow their advance for the sake of comfort. Theirs was a philosophy forged in urgency. Every frozen foot, every bite of cold rations, every sleepless night was a necessary step toward ending the nightmare, before it consumed more lives than the war already had.